Alright, so that one caught me off guard a little bit. I didn't realize it was going to go into another clip. Ellie, no. Hey, get down. Come here. They always pick the most convenient time to start picking at each other. Come here. So, kind of briefly went back and examined the end of the last video where it left off. And so, yeah, I got home and my friend was with me that night. I think she might have actually been there 2 or 3 days before somebody else came in. This was like basically a very brief point where my mom and possibly my sister at some point started coming in and staying in the room during parts of the day and night, because basically what had happened was I was basically in a state where I wasn't able to take care of myself on my own. I was still debilitated by that illness and that pain that I knew was not natural. And I was confined to bed pretty much. I really couldn't eat. I could hardly move. I had people basically, like, practically trying to spoon feed me food. And I couldn't even, like, make the walk on my own from the room that I was boarding into the bathroom across the hall. And so that was pretty much one of the worst states in regards to how severe it was and how long it went on. So that was a very terrifying thing to me, because when I was going through 8 hours process of abuse, I would be sick kind of around the clock, but it wasn't as intense as it was nothing compared to this. And even when I was in severe pain, which I was in pain every day, but when it was the worst, I would drive myself like an hour away to Catholic Mass when I felt like there was basically an ice pick going through my eye into my brain, just radiating throbbing pain, vomiting, all sorts of things. And again, just not something I can really describe in human words, but I would like push myself to the limit for anything religious practices, sacrifices, and things like that. That was basically my life. And when a day passed, and 2 days passed, and 3 days passed, and it didn't let up, I began to panic more and more, and start to wonder if it was ever going to end. And basically had to struggle against the temptation to kill myself, and also partially just begging God to take me. I remember at that point in my life, I wanted to die. There was nothing to me at the time that I could see that felt worth it staying on this earth, and I just wanted to die and be with God. I was just done. I just felt completely finished and confused, because this had been going on a year already, and it had been going on 2 years with the other priest. And but even at that point where I was down there so low and so sick, I still went 3 more years before leaving that diocese. So this continued for 3 weeks before it let up. And when it lets up, it's instantaneous usually. It's just like gone. And I remember it was a Monday specifically that happened. And so I was deathly ill, and all of a sudden 3 weeks later on a Monday, I hopped out of bed and I was all over the place. You know, just like walking around, saying hi to random people on the street, just living, you know. Got the heck out of the room and everything. And so, but during those 3 weeks, the last thing I expected these people to do was leave me in that state. And that's exactly what they did. I remember begging them for help, begging on the phone. Really the only person I was able to communicate with was the deacon at the time that they had there, and they had, in the contracts that I signed, I had to speak with him twice a week and let him pray over the phone. He always did these charismatic prayers and tried to cast out demons over the phone and stuff like that. And just everything they did in the end made me worse. And even in the beginning, or when there were certain points of relief, even euphoria and ecstasy that they talk about among a lot of their like Catholic saints and things like that. Those were kind of the things that kept me going when I was just completely finished. And now, as a Christian where I stand today, I realize that was never a reason, never something that should have kept me going. You know, we aren't supposed to live and make decisions based on euphoric experiences or suffering or anything like that. We're supposed to make decisions according to common sense, God-given common sense, and, you know, by His Word, which I carried a Bible around like a teddy bear, but I sure as heck didn't read it. Not in context, anyway. I would flip open and just randomly read a sentence here and there, and then I would follow along the Catholic liturgical isolations for their liturgies and stuff like that. But that was definitely a pivotal moment, and I really don't know how I continued. And most of the time I was going through this in my life, I didn't know how I continued. I often asked myself. Other people would ask me, like, how do you do this? I couldn't do this. How do you do this? And I used to just respond, how can I not? You know, how can I just give up? Like, how can I live the rest of my life tormented in this way? You know, I was going to fight for freedom. But the main thing and the main leverage that these people had over me and that religion had over me was my love for my family and my absolute determination to help them and, you know, get them the help that they need so they could be happy and well. Because all my life, all I've ever known is my family in suffering. Ever. And it continues that way to this day for the most part. Just suffering. My family is the wreck after a hurricane that just never really gets cleaned up or rebuilt or fixed. And, you know, I particularly was close to my mom and my 5 younger siblings, and I was pretty much fine with dying for them, doing anything that I possibly could, and the team used that to motivate me, to push me through things that I never would have done did I not think that they were counting on me, that my family needed me to do it, that if I did not do it, then they would not be free. The diocese told me I was a link in a chain, and I had to stick it out, and I was this chosen person of the family, and I needed to do this, and if I didn't and I walked away, then my family would always be miserable and would never be better, never be free, never be happy, never be well. And so, though I carried that responsibility on my shoulders from the time I was a kid, in the sense of just knowing that my family needed me financially, emotionally, in every single way possible, it was just on a whole new level. This was just spiritual warfare. This was, I can't give this up. My family's at stake. And so they were primarily the ones in my mind that I fought for. They're the reason that I pushed through everything I did, next to believing it was God's will, and I would do anything for God and what I believed that He wanted, for 2 primary reasons. One, because I always had a desire to be good and to do what God wanted me to do. But I believe another huge reason was, you know, from the time I was little, it was very much instilled in me to be afraid of God, that He was just waiting to cast me into hell, and if I didn't do everything that the religion told me to do, or I deviated in any way, primarily things that I honestly didn't have control over, I was just in a constant paranoia and fear of going to hell, and then also purgatory, and even heaven at times. Just this fear because of the corrupt stories and perspectives and things that they instill into kids from the very young stages there. So that's one of the exorcisms that kind of stood out among, I'd say, probably about 3 or 4 other ones. But that was the longest one. It was the most intense one. It was the sickest I had ever been in that sense. And, yeah, I never jumped out of a moving car and begged somebody to run me over before. Despite, you know, my life definitely, understandably, being able to drive somebody to that point beforehand. So, some questions that I've received regarding what you see in Hollywood with exorcism or demonic, you know, possession versus reality. And based on my experience and my experience only, I've absolutely seen supernatural things happen. Just to kind of give a list of stuff that does happen that's in movies, which are things that should just always be ignored and rebuked in the name of Jesus. Not any other pagan idol, not any other queen of heaven, nothing. Jesus. So, the waking up at the hour of 3 a.m. Some point during the hour of 3 a.m. in a terror and sweat, you know, nightmares, whatever, just waking up, period. That's a thing. It's totally a thing. You know, televisions turning themselves off and on. Lights turning themselves off and on. Very typical, standard, mediocre. Footsteps, I'd say probably the most common one that I grew up with from the time I was a little kid. And then all the way through to when I was living, you know, all on my own. At times, is the footsteps. And the footsteps are very particular. Like, you can be in a house that only has one floor with no stairs, and you'll hear, you know, somebody coming up or down the stairs. And it's always a very urgent, you realize everybody else is asleep, there's nobody else that would be making those footsteps, and it's always a very, very urgent, like somebody kind of firmly, not quite running, but walking really fast and hard. And so, that's something. The footsteps, things getting pushed over off of tables. I had a lot of sacramental objects when I was a Catholic, miraculous medals, rosaries, things like that, scapulars, things that you carry around as a Catholic. And those things often, you know, get pushed around, knocked off tables, like right before my eyes and everything. Those are the type of things that me and my siblings were so used to growing up that other people around that started learning about our family's demonic problems would freak out when they witnessed things like that, but we would just shrug it off. I mean, we were just so used to seeing so much our entire lives as children that it just didn't faze us the way it fazed other people. So that's kind of more like harassment. Anybody can experience that, that's being particularly harassed, you know, by the demonic, that isn't covered in the blood of Christ, that has not been saved and received his gift of salvation. And so that is something that can happen and will happen. And I believe even Christians can be attacked on an external level and harassed in that way. So also, you know, just finding certain things upside down, religious artifacts and pictures and things like that. On one hand, somebody like one of my brothers would kind of question and ask, well, why do you think they're knocking those things over, or turning those things upside down, you know, if they're not of God, if they're evil? Well, I would argue that it's because they're evil, that they're able to manipulate them more, you know, because there are things that belong to them, basically. And I know that this is something that Catholics watching that use these items that are ignorant of this. And again, I don't judge you. I was the exact same way. God's word is clear. We don't do these things. We don't have those things. We don't reverence those things, carry those things around, you know. No kissing your scapular 3 times is going to let out 1,000 souls from purgatory type thing. I mean, look into the roots of where this stuff started. Look into the roots of where the doctrines and teachings started. In Catholicism, where Catholicism itself started, outside of Catholic resources.